Thank you for your presentation. Actually, it's really timely for me because I just had a disturbing experience. I'm from Canada and we just had Thanksgiving. And I was just this morning on Facebook and there was a picture of a turkey, probably from a factory farm, and very likely even be in this presentation. It's a really disturbing photo. Malnourished turkey. Most of his feathers had fallen off and you could see his bones. And, I mean, it was horrific. But actually the line on it said something like, I made it through the weekend, how about you guys? Kind of thing. And whoever had posted it had tagged a bunch of people in it. And people were responding, yeah, it was a great weekend, that's certainly how I feel. And this total misrecognition that I just, and so I've actually been in this situation before where something gets posted on Facebook and it's totally disturbing and I've responded and said something and then put myself in a situation where I'm attacked. And so I end up in these sort of delicate negotiations with myself sometimes because, you hear all the time, don't fight on Facebook or the internet, that's stupid, But then you don't want to be silent either. But then at the same time, you question sometimes the effectiveness of speaking up sometimes. So I guess what I'm asking is, what do we do when we see images like this and they become appropriated and reframed in a way that further dissociates the viewer and so that they can even be funny? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's precisely the question that really interests me. I mean, what happens when people so easily make fun of images of animal suffering? And my experiences come from England, where I used to live for 8 years and was heavily involved with animal rights activism there, or animal liberationism. And every Saturday I would see tens of people who would laugh at really gruesome images that we were holding on placards. And they genuinely seem to find them funny. And I struggle with the idea that it's just a defense mechanism, because they were genuinely amused. They would really, and I think that for them it was the fact that we were animal advocates or animal rights activists who were holding the placards was the reason for their laughter, and they wanted to somehow communicate their very demeaning attitude towards us by laughing. But I think that because the culture is so filled with images of suffering, and because and it's viewed as entertainment, the gruesome, gorish horror films that are everywhere these days that are actually quite almost documentary-like, Hostel, there are lots of examples of really extreme horror that are viewed as complete entertainment. And it goes everywhere in culture. People are finding images of suffering as an aesthetic. I think that goes to help people to also use it as a source of amusement. And I think that it's a part of the process of alienation from the actual causes of suffering, because in the Western world we have very little suffering and very few actually have to undergo any great, completely debilitating pain in their lives. And because we have such cushy lifestyles, I think that slightly helps to alienate oneself from scenes of suffering and images of suffering. And then when you combine that with the demeaning attitude towards animal liberation ideas, it becomes really easy to make mockery of those images, because the suffering doesn't matter to begin with. So. And I think that, because in phenomenology, suffering is something that you have to have endured to truly understand the suffering of another. It's the intersubjectivity on the level of experiencing something that you can see in another creature. If we accept that viewpoint, then I think that our cushy lifestyles go to playing for quite a bit of the alienation and the mockery that images of suffering gain. I don't know if I answered your question. My English is a bit...
Sephora? Hi, I'm just wondering what you think of the effectiveness of using positive images of animals, rehabilitated animals, not just cute cats and dogs, but specifically the ugly animals, pigs, chickens, and others, rats as well, to sort of counterbalance some of the pitfalls that you've highlighted here in using images of suffering.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I thank you for it because otherwise I wouldn't have mentioned it. There's a lot of research into images of human suffering. There's a whole bunch of research on the topic, and they've consistently proven that, oddly enough, images of extreme suffering work least when you compare them to either just text on a leaflet or positive images of happy human beings. So human rights advocacy often now uses just text, and that's partly because in Western culture, text is equated with rationality and with capacity and all sorts of positive characteristics. And the reader feels like somebody knows what's happening and that there's something that can be done. They believe text a lot more than they do images. And that's obviously what Derrida kind of talks about that too. But the text orientation of Western and language orientation of Western worlds mean that texts can be better sometimes. So even no images of animals might work. But after text, the second best option is positive images in human rights context. There really are so many studies about how showing, for instance, people from third world countries as capable, active beings who are trying to make do with what they have is a lot more effective than showing blood and guts, basically. And that's something that advocacy should maybe consider a bit more. But then the danger is that it becomes too fluffy, and that you start to hide the realities. Because I think there's a bit of a difference between human and non-human suffering in the sense that the latter doesn't get much media exposure. And if you just have happy animals on leaflets or literature, people too easily see them as something similar as the advertisements that animal industries put forward. The happy cows on the fields and So you might end up just reproducing the imagery and the presumption of animal happiness within the industries. So I think this is something that should really be looked into. Advocacy definitely has to concentrate on these types of issues and explore them further. What works, what's persuasive, what's the best form of rhetoric when it comes to images. But yeah, thank you for the question.
I noticed that, so perhaps this is a function of the arena of photography, but there were only pictures of the suffering subjects. There was no picture of a human hand or the human, right, was only just implied in each of these. And so, I could ask 1,000 questions about that. One, which is just, do you feel in your experience or philosophically that is consistent to not have the actual concrete representation of the mechanism, I guess, there? You don't have to see the cage, but again, it's just a cage. Or is it perhaps that really it's difficult to view yourself as somebody who's willing to slit sentient beings' throats, and so that gives you a chance to distance yourself from the action? But I was wondering how the sort of assumption of this neutral body that's just happening to get hurt in some way, and the absence of the perpetrator in that photo, it plays out.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and the reason why there are no human beings in these images is that they are undercover images, or they're taken in the farms during the night time, and so you cannot have the farmer there. But so these specific images are maybe, and it's interesting because these are the ones that the Finnish advocates have put forward, and they really have gained a lot of prime time, TV attention and media attention, and maybe it is something that they or we should think about whether they imply the absence of human violence somehow, that the animals are just as if they were somehow stuck in misery, but that there was no agent behind their misery. So it's something, it's a really good question, and I really have to put it forward to those that take footage, because, but the problem, of course, is that when you do undercover video, it's very difficult. But of course, there's a lot of imagery within animal advocacy that does have that agency present. So you have slaughterhouse footage, and you have footage from fur farms where people are holding the animals and they're being skinned, and that the very kind of popular is the wrong term, but very well-known images of the raccoons being skinned alive and people holding them and actively doing the violence. But yes, it's a really, really important issue whether images that have no agency betray the wrong type of a message. So thank you for that comment.
I'm wondering what you think about historical images. So all the work that I do is in the 19th century or very early 20th century. So obviously, with what you were talking about before about images having some sort of moral agency because they inspire action now, with any sort of animal suffering, that long ago, you can't do anything. I've made a decision when I'm giving a presentation not to show any images at all or anything that even suggests suffering, and I'm not even dealing with photographs because the images that I've got are just like cartoons or sketches or whatever. They're not photographs at all. And I don't even know why I don't even know why I feel so uncomfortable about it, because I am willing to verbally describe suffering to a certain extent. That's sort of the first part of the question. Second part of the question is, what do you think is the political difference between maybe showing a photograph and some other form of representation like a sketch or a cartoon or something else that suggests suffering?
Well, the first question, I'm with you on that, because I don't look at images anymore, and I find it really hard. And it's not only that I find it very upsetting, but also I feel that it is obscene. I feel that there's something wrong in the act of looking at these images. And I really wrestled with myself about whether I should show them here, because there's a danger of contradiction. Because I believe that people, I think that the act of looking can be a lot more justifiable when the promise of that kind of moral epiphany is there. But when it's not, I don't think we should look. And since most people here have had that, or I hope everybody has had that epiphany, maybe us now looking at these images is dubious. And so I agree with you. There's something, Kutsi really gets it well when he describes the sentiment of feeling that there's something wrong in your own character to look at the suffering of another creature. And it's such a private thing. And I wanted to talk about the concept of private suffering here as well, but that's a really huge topic, because the idea of private suffering in animal context is quite difficult. Because if you go within human suffering or images of human suffering, the very common argument is that you shouldn't show very private moments. As some images are far too personal for the sufferer. So if you remember the Benetton advert that you had a dying HIV patient, and they got a lot of criticism because they rendered that private moment into a public spectacle. And this question is very interesting when it comes to non-human suffering, because does the concept of private suffering apply there in an equal sense? Should we ever look at these really personal moments in animals' lives? And I think that we should, but I don't know why. And I wish I would have had more time to try and explore that question. And what was your second question?
Just about whether you think there's a different politics in showing non-photographic representations.
I don't know, but I think I wanted to mention here also, literature can be used really effectively to communicate animal suffering, and there it can be completely fictional and not explicit at all. It can be in between the lines. It can not involve any details of the actual concrete pain. And I think Cora Diamond emphasizes the act of persuasion in philosophy, and particularly moral philosophy, and and argues that animal advocacy also should be based on persuading messages to others, and here explicitness may not always work, but she uses the example of literature, and that's an interest, and maybe cartoons or sketches do the same thing, and they don't need to be explicit either. You know, there's so many ways in which suffering can be communicated, and this is just one way of doing it. And you know, it's a huge area, and I hope that people start to research it more because it's also really important. Yeah.
And sorry, if I could just make one really quick comment. Just on the question of desensitization, I often think that, and I was thinking about this as you were talking, that maybe as animal rights activists we are more desensitized than the rest of the population, because sometimes just talking about animal suffering to people who have no animal rights consciousness at all, but you know, they're shocked and horrified, but they actually do nothing in their lives to change that. Whereas I think that I'm relatively desensitized to these images because in my research, and I just deal with this every day. So maybe there's a good type of desensitization that we as animal rights activists have.
Well, I think that's it, you know, the common argument is that it's not desensitization as such, but rather channeling your emotions into anger. And that's what activists often argue. They maintain that you should not cry, but do something, feel enraged and angry. And that's why they can look at images without any problems, because they want to feel that anger. And that's important too. That in itself is an interesting topic to explore as well. So thank you for your question.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask if your paper will be available online. Because I think many of us would like to read it.
Yeah, I hope to publish it someday. Maybe Richard can have conference proceedings.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to say a few things by making some farewell to the conference, but first of all, please do thank Elisa for